رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Inshallah, we'll be continuing where we left off of عن الطالب من الغيب. In the previous lesson, we started with Kitab al-Tahara and the types of waters. Miyah. We said that waters, three types: Tahur, Tahir, Najis. Also then, from that, added into that, that which is Mubah. That's for Tahur. And we also spoke about rulings that it's possible to own and use any container doesn't contain gold or silver. As for containers of gold and silver, similar utensils and things, then that's not permissible, even for women. Unless it's a small amount of silver used to fix container, and that's only allowed if the amount of silver is small and it's used for. And after that, inshallah, we're going to speak more about Istinja. But before that, there was one masala which was part of the previous section, which I forgot to mention, which was, it says in the book, وَلَا يَطْهُرُ جِلْدُ مَيْتَةٍ بِدِبَاغٍ. This is speaking about the issue of likewise any animal which is the size of a cat or smaller is also tahir, meaning its body is pure. If an animal is pure, tahir al-ain, obviously its meat can be used, eaten, and likewise skin and fur can be used for clothing and making items out of that, like bags or whatever it may be, like cases, suitcases, and things like that. That's for an animal which is halal to eat, and it's those animals are impure. The meta, and basically a carcass, it is najis, impure. So therefore, it's not permissible to use. So al-mayta, an animal which hasn't been slaughtered properly, or is an animal which is inherently najis, both of those are impermissible to use, and the skin or fur is also najis. Because it's impure, not permissible to use. Now, some of the ulama, they say that skins of animals can be tanned, which is called dibar in Arabic. After being tanned, they're permissible to use. They become pure by tanning. The position of the madhab regarding that is, as is mentioned here, that وَلَا يَطْهُرُ جِلْدُ مَيْتَةٍ بِدِبَاغٍ. Animal was impure, or it was mayta, meaning not slaughtered properly, then its skin is najis, impure, and it does not become pure through being tanned. Dibar is any tanning or any other similar sort of treatment which is done in order to clean the skin or the. The madhab says that jild al-mayta does not become pure through al-dibar. They say that those are hadith which mention the purification of jild al-mayta. Those are hadith are mansukha. They are abrogated. So, type of that, the madhab does say that it's permissible to use such skins with certain conditions. They say يجوز استعمال باغ أو جلد صبغ من حيوان طاهر في الحياة. Permissible to use the skin of an animal as being tanned if that animal was tahir fil hayah, if it was an animal which was considered to be tahir, pure, when it was alive, meaning an animal which is permissible to eat, or an animal which is smaller than a cat or smaller in size. Those animals, skins can be used after being tanned, despite them not becoming tahir. They remain najis, they'll still have the ruling of najasa, therefore you can't pray on it, you can't pray wearing it, the ruling which I mentioned as well. But you can use it in other things. You can use it for example, make a suitcase, you can use it to make carpet or something if you're not going to pray on it. So it's permissible to use those julud, those skins, with these three conditions. First, that it has to be tanned, so it's only permissible after being tanned. The second condition is that it has to be طاهر في الحياة, it has to be an animal which was considered to be pure whilst alive. And the third condition is في اليابس, يعني في غير مائع. It can only be used in places where it's not going to come into contact with water. And في اليابسات, used in dry places, the dry usages. So it can't be used, for example, to make containers like that. Because it's najis, therefore, if it was used in things which necessitate making contact with water, that would cause the najasa to spread. That's the ruling of jildul mayta, the skins of any dead animals. Now, starting with the next section, Babul Istinja, the rulings regarding Istinja. So, Istinja, it is linguistically meaning, يعني نجا ينجو, can mean to cut something. Al-qat, نجوت الشجرة قطعتها, I cut the tree. And what it means in the Shari sense, it is إزالة أو إزالة ما خرج من السبيلين بماء طهور أو إزالة حكمه بحجر ونحوه كخرق. It is the removal of that which comes out of the sabilain, the any two private parts, بماء طهور, using or purifying water, or to remove its ruling, or إزالة حكمه حكمها, or to remove its ruling, which is done through بحجر ونحوه, through using pebbles or tissues or rocks and things like that. So by that we know that istinja is two types. Istinja bima, using water, or istinja, which is the better option, and it removes the najasa haqiqatan. It actually removes impurity. The second option is al-istijmar. Istijmar, which means al-istinja bi al-hajar wa nahwihi, use tissues or things like that. Now, al-istijmar, it removes hukm al-najasa. It removes the ruling of the najasa. Meaning it's as if there is no najasa. So then you can make wudhu and you can make salah. But as for removing ayn al-najasa, removing the najasa, the impurity in its entirety, then that's not necessarily possible or a condition with using tissues and things like that. It's al-istijmar. So we'll mention the conditions for istijmar, but for now what concerns us is that istinja bil ma, that is removing ayn al-najasa, or izalat al-najasa haqiqatan, removing the najasa in reality, true sense. As for istijmar, it is removing the hukm, the ruling of the najasa, meaning therefore it's considered to have purified yourself, so you can then make wudu and you can salah. Now, it says, before we speak about the rulings of najasa, the muallif author mentioned some of the adab, others, things which are recommended to do when using the toilet. It says, يستحب قبل دخول الخلاء قول بسم الله أعوذ بالله من الخبث والخبائث. The thing he mentioned here is that it is recommended before entering the toilet, al-khala meaning the toilet, or the place a person goes to do qada al-haja, even if it's not like a building, even if it's like, for example, in an empty area like the desert or whatever it may be, and you're going to that place where you're going to use the toilet to do qada al-haja, it's recommended to say Bismillah, a'udhu billahi min al-khubuthi wal-khaba'ith. There's two narrations of the hadith. One narration says khubuth, there's a dhamma, and one narration which says khubuth with the sukun on the ba. That's the dua which a person makes when going to the toilet, before going into the toilet. It says وَبَعْدَ الْخُرُوجِ, after coming out, the person says غفرانك الحمد لله الذي أذهب عني الأذى وعافاني. The person is coming out of the toilet, it's recommended for them to say this. The first dua, which means Bismillah, in the name of Allah, أعوذ بالله, I take protection in Allah, إلى الخبث والخبائث يعني the filth. And as for the ratio, it says خبث, then that would be the plural of خبيث, meaning shayateen. The khaba'ith, plural of khabitha, which can also mean shayateen or female shayateen. And as for the other hadith, or the other dua which the person makes when leaving the says غفرانك, meaning أطلب غفرانك, Ya Allah, I seek your forgiveness, O Allah. Alhamdulillah alladhi, all praises to Allah, the one أذهب عني الأذى, who removed the adha, harm or dirty things, وعافاني, has and given me afia, meaning like protection and similar stuff. And it says مقدما رجله اليسرى دخولا واليمنى خروجا. Likewise, from those manners using the toilet is to enter with your left foot, to exit with your right foot. عكس المسجد, opposite of what a person does when entering the masjid. Likewise, when entering the house, you enter with your right foot and exit with your left foot. As for entering the toilet, then it's the opposite. You enter with your left foot and you exit with your right foot. And the next manner which is mentioned here is إذا فرغ من بوله, and when he had finished when he had finished urinating, إن مسح ذكره بيده اليسرى ثلاثا من دبره إلى رأسه. Something which the madhab recommends is that when a male finishes urinating, he does مسح ذكره ثلاثا, that he wipes his private parts 3 times, meaning that he, I'd say that he basically pulls on it from its base to the tip so that any remaining urine comes out, and he does that 3 times. That's recommended in the madhab, even though some of the ulama like Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah do not recommend. مثل ونثر وثلاثا, also too, and he do nathr of it 3 times, which is any similar to that. Like it. And it says that's another recommended action to do. ويكره دخوله بما فيه اسم الله. That's disliked to enter with anything which has the name of Allah in it. Entering anything which has with anything which has the name of Allah, like coins or like a ring and things like that, that is disliked. And there's 2 exceptions to this. The first is mushaf, entering the toilets with the Quran, that is haram, makruh. Here it says entering with anything which has the name of Allah is disliked. If it's a mushaf, then that is haram, not just merely disliked. Likewise, entering the toilet with something يتكرر إليه الحاجة, something which person regularly needs, like notes, coins, currencies. If those currencies have the name of Allah in it, then that's mubah, that's permissible, due to al-hajj, due to the need, because it'd be difficult for every time the person to go to the toilet, they have to take the cash out of their pockets. Next thing which mentions, so he said ويكره دخوله بما فيه اسم الله وكلامه فيه. Likewise, it is disliked to speak whilst in the toilet. Likewise, it's also disliked to mention the name of Allah in babi awla. Name of Allah in the toilet, that is disliked. And as for reading Quran in there, reading an ayah, that is haram. ومس فرجه بيمينه. Likewise, it is disliked for a person to touch their private parts, whether it be the front or back private parts, with their right hand. استنجاؤه واستجماره بها بلا عذر. Likewise, it is disliked for a person to do istinja or istijmar with the right hand. Those are all disliked. However, the way that a person should do it is with their left hand. The next point which he mentions is وَيَحْرُمُ لُبْثُهُ زَمَانًا فَوْقَ حَاجَتِهِ. Likewise, it is here it's talking about some things which are haram. So we spoke about the things which are mustahab, recommended, the things which are disliked. Now it's going to mention the things which are haram. So the first thing mentioned is لُبْثُهُ زَمَانًا فَوْقَ حَاجَتِهِ, for a person to remain in the toilet longer than necessary. This is something which is haram into madhab. For several reasons. One reason given is that it's going to mean that the person is going to uncover the awrah, for longer than necessary, and covering the awrah for longer than necessary is haram. Likewise, because it's a place where there are shayateen, so that can also cause harm for it. Likewise, they say that even medically, that this is from staying in the toilet for too long. It says وَبَوْلُهُ فِي طَرِيقٍ وَظِلٍّ نَافِعٍ. Likewise, one of those things which is haram is to urinate in tariq. Urinate in a. Now it says so we mentioned it's haram to urinate in tariq, in a path which people take, anywhere which people walk or drive. It's haram to urinate those paths. وَظِلٍّ نَافِعٍ. Likewise, it is haram to urinate place where there is shade which people use. Dhil, a shade which is nafi', beneficial, meaning people sit under there or they park their cars under there or anything like that. Such a place would also be haram to urinate. As for dhil ghayr nafi', if it's shade which no one uses, which there's no benefit in, then there's no problem in urinating there. These are the only two mentioned here in the book, but there are other places as well which are haram according to the madhab, such as تحت شجرة مقصودة تحت شجرة لها ثمر مقصود. You urinate under a tree which has fruits, or the fruits which people use either to eat or to feed the animals and other than that. Urinating under such trees is also haram. Likewise, it's haram to urinate في مورد الماء, place where water is going to like in rivers or lakes, things like that, where many people can't take water from that place. Urinating there is going to turn into water. That's also haram. The next thing you mentioned is also haram to face the Qibla or to turn your back to the Qibla whilst urinating or defecating. Haram to face it in fada, in an open area. And if a person was to be in a place outside, not within a building, here, in using the toilet, they need to not face the Qibla or turn their back to it. They, like it says in the hadith, وَلَكِنْ شَرِقُوا وَغَرِبُوا, يعني left or right, a way which they are not facing Qibla or turning their back to it. But this, as I mentioned, is only haram في الفضاء, open places. As for في البنيان, side buildings, then it is permissible. Likewise, al-fada means that there has to be no barrier. If there's a barrier between you and the Qibla, then that's also not a problem according to them. For example, there must be a wall behind you, or if you put up a curtain or anything like that, then that also is fine. It's only haram if you're directly facing the Qibla, or turning your back to the Qibla, there's no barrier between you and the Qibla. Next thing it says, وَأَنْ يَسْتَجْمِرَ بِعَظْمٍ أَوْثٍ. Likewise, it's haram for a person to istijmar, and to wipe themselves with azm, with a bone. With any sort of bone, it's haram to istijmar. And likewise, rawth, what's the word for it in English? Feces from animals and things like that, which hardened up and turned into like rocks that are made of pieces of animals. Those are also haram to do istijmar with. Likewise, other things which aren't mentioned here is food, anything which can be eaten by a human or by an animal, is haram to do istijmar with. Likewise, the muhtaram, anything which is muhtaram, anything which is kept in the Deen, like the books of knowledge or things like that, that's also haram to do istijmar with. Also, al-muttasil bi-haywan, anything which is part of an animal, like you would use the tail of the things which can be used for istijmar. the conditions in it are firstly that it be tahir, something which is pure. Therefore, you can't use anything which is najis, like we mentioned, for example, jildul mayta, skins of dead animals, as they're impure, they cannot be used. Or istijmar. Nashif, second condition has to be something which is dry. Anything which is wet or moist cannot be used for istijmar. The third condition is that to be mubah, has to be something which is permissible use. So therefore, anything which is muharram, haram to have, such as any stolen items, they cannot be used for istijmar. Because istijmar is a rukhsa. It is a something which Allah has made easy for us, a rukhsa. The principle in that is rukhas la tustabahu bima'asiyah. Rukhas, any rukhsa, anything which was made easy for us by Allah, they do not apply when you make it for yourself through haram means, such as using haram items which were stolen or bought with haram money. They cannot be used for istijmar. The fourth condition is munqid, that has to be something which actually cleans. So if it's not something which cleans the place and removes the najasa, then it cannot be used. So they give the example of, for example, if a person was to use something which is very smooth, like glass, then, or maybe some plastics, then such thing isn't going to actually remove the najasa. So therefore, it's not sufficient for istijmar. Then it says, so those were the four conditions regarding the istajmar bihi, the thing which a person uses for istijmar. There are also other conditions, istijmar nafsi, regarding the istijmar itself. Those conditions being, the first, it has to be يعني ألا يتجاوز نجس المحل, for the najasa, for the excrement or urine to have not gone past its محله المعتاد, its regular place of exit. So, for example, if the urine was to go on a person's thigh or go on other parts of their body, then that needs to be washed off. It cannot be wiped away, because now it's gone past the place where it can be used for, or where istijmar can be done for. The second condition is that it has to be salat mashat, 3 wipes, which is mentioned in the next line here. It says ويجب أن يستنجي في كل مخرج أو في كل مخرج 7. It is obligatory to do istinja, and when istinja here means with water, في كل مخرج, in both places where exit comes, sabilain, 7 times. So when person's using water, the conditions in that is firstly that the water has to be tahurun, to be purifying water, and 3 types of water, tahur, tahir, or najis. Istinja can only be done with water which is tahur. Second condition is that it has to be done 7 times. 7 ghuslat, 7 washes. وأن يستجمل 3. As for in wiping, then it's only obligatory for it to be done 3 times, 3 wipes. So that's the condition regarding the amount of numbers we mentioned. There are 4 conditions in the thing which a person does istijmar with. It has to be tahir, pure, nashif, dry, mubah, permissible to use, munqin, something which actually cleans. Likewise, mentioned the condition that لا يتجاوز نجس المحل المعتاد, where the najasa does not go past its regular place of exit. The 6th condition was for it to be يستجمل 3, 3 wipes. And the 7th condition is أن يزيل عين النجس, for it to remove the najasa itself. بحيث يبقى أثر لا يزيله إلا الماء. When is it enough? When has a person done istijmar properly? for him to have removed any sort of athar, any sort of yani, signs or any sort of effects of that impurity, except that which can't be removed with other than water. Meaning, as you mentioned earlier, istijmar, it can't remove the najasa 100%. It's going to remove it like 95%, 98%, for example. So that remaining amount which can't be removed through merely wiping, it needs water. It's ma'fu'an, meaning that is forgiven. The person can make wudu despite of it. And that small athar, they say it's yani, for the water to make the private parts return to their regular state in terms of like dryness and things like that. And that goes back to water. As for removing the feces or the urine itself, then that is necessary in both istijmar and istinja. So in istijmar, it has to be 3 wipes. That's assuming that 3 wipes are sufficient for removing najasa. Likewise, they say, أن تعم كل مسحة المحل, for every wipe to be for the whole mahal, the whole place where the najasa comes from, whole private part, meaning the rectum or the place where the urine comes out of. They can't just wipe some of it, they have to wipe the whole place. Each wipe has to be for the whole place, and it has to be at least 3 wipes. That's if 3 wipes is enough to remove the najasa. If it's not, then the person does more. And likewise in water as well, if the person's using water, it has to be of a minimum 7 washes. If 7 washes is enough, then that's it. But if it's not enough, then they have to increase until the najasa, the impurity, has been removed in its entirety. There it says, وَالْأَفْضَلْ أَنْ يَسْتَجْمِرَ ثُمَّ يَسْتَنْجِي إِنْ عَكَسَ كُرِهَ. The best thing to do is to do istijmar first with tissues or something similar to that, then to do istinja after it, then to use water. So first you wipe yourself 3 or more times, then you also wash 7 or more times. That is the sunnah. That is the best choice. That's the best choice. The second choice is to just use water, which is also fine, but it's not as good as the first. And the third choice is to just do istijmar, wiping only. And that is also permissible. As for washing first, then wiping, then that is disliked. In akasa kuriha, that's was to wash first, then to wipe istijmar, then this is something which is disliked. Since here the wiping doesn't have any effect, it doesn't have any benefit, so it's just israf, just wastefulness. So now we finished speaking about the issues relating to istinja. We're now going to speak about the issues relating to sunnah al-wudu, the things which are recommended to do in wudu, and also the things recommended to do before wudu. This says fasl, section, يسن التسوق عرضا بيسراه. Here we're going to speak about the siwak. Siwak is something which is a sunnah muakkada, a highly recommended sunnah. The Prophet said, لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك عند كل صلاة. I wasn't to burden my ummah, I would have commanded them to do siwak with every salah. So a siwak, according to the madhab, it can only be done with a stick from a tree. Siwak cannot be done with something other than that. So if a person uses other than a miswak, the way which we know, the regular stick used for siwak, then they haven't lam yusibu sunnah. They haven't fulfilled the sunnah. That doesn't mean they won't get any reward. There's still the general reward of nadafa, cleanliness. The person's like using toothbrushes and brushing your teeth and so on. You still have some reward, which is the reward of nadafa, cleanliness, but you don't get the reward of a siwak specifically. To get the reward of siwak, you have to use a siwak stick. And the sunnah of it, as is mentioned here, is yusannu tasawwuku arban, for the person to siwak horizontally. when they're brushing their teeth with the siwak, they brush horizontally. بِيُسْرَاهُ, using the left hand. So in the madhab, siwak is done with the left hand. And done in 3 parts of the mouth: the teeth, the gums, and the lips. Not the lips, sorry, the tongue. The teeth, the gums, and the tongue. All 3 are brushed with the siwak. And the person starts with the right hand side of their mouth, moves to the left. They're moving horizontally. That's the sunnah of siwak. It says bi'ud layyin, with a ud meaning a stick, which is layyin, is soft. As for a stick which is like very hard or very tough on the teeth or the gums, then that is disliked because it can cause damage. So it's recommended for it to be layyin, for it to be soft. As for siwak using other than any oud, other than a stick, then that's, like, for example, you might see some people doing tasawwuk with their fingers when doing wudu. That's some ulama say it's recommended, but no. According to madhab, siwak is only done with a oud. And it says, in kulli waqt, in all times, it's recommended to do siwak at all times. Meaning, in whatever situation you are, it's recommended to do siwak, except for case which is إِلَّا لِصَائِمٍ بَعْدَ الزَّوَالِ فَيُكْرَهُ, except for a person who is fasting. Person is fasting, then there's 3 situations for them. The first situation is if they've entered afternoon, بعد الزوال, meaning after, when dhuhr time comes in, after midday. There, doing siwak is disliked. Is disliked. As the Prophet said, لَخَلُوفُ فَمِ الصَّائِمِ أَطْيَبُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ مِنْ رِيحِ الْمِسْكِ. That the smell of the mouth person fasting is more beloved to Allah than the smell of perfume. So if you're doing siwak, you're going to remove that smell. Therefore, the madhab said that it's disliked to do siwak after midday, after zawal, meaning dhuhr time onwards, for a person who is fasting. As for before dhuhr time, then here it can either be mubah, permissible, or mustahab, recommended, depending on the type of siwak you use. If you use a siwak which is moist, bi'ud and ratb, then this is mubah, it's permissible before dhuhr time, not recommended. As for if it's yabis, it's a dry siwak, a dry stick, then that is recommended before the dhuhr time. So, in summary, for a person who's fasting, as for before dhuhr time, if they use a siwak which is yabis, dry, that's recommended. If they use one which is moist, then that is permissible. As for after zawal, then it is unrestrictedly disliked. It is makruh for a sign. Then it says, وَيَتَأَكَّدُ عِنْدَ وُضُوءٍ وَصَلَاةٍ وَنَحْوِهِمَا. We said, generally speaking, that siwak is recommended all times. But there are certain times where that recommendation is higher, more recommended. It says يَتَأَكَّدُ, meaning it's more emphasized in the wudu'in, when a person is doing wudu, specifically when they're doing part of the wudu where you wash your mouth, it's recommended to do use siwak for that tasawwuk. Salah, also it's recommended to use siwak for salah when a person is about to start praying. After the iqamah, person does siwak, uses the siwak, and then they start praying. وَنَحْوِهِمَا, and other times which are similar to that, such as عند دخول المسجد, when a person enters the masjid, recommended to use siwak. عند دخول البيت, enters the house, also recommended to use siwak. In the قراءة القرآن, when a person is about to read the Quran, it's also recommended to use siwak. And there's other times as well which I mentioned. وَتَغَيُّرِ رَائِحَةِ فَمٍ وَنَحْوِهِ. Likewise, it's recommended to use siwak when a person's mouth changes. Yani, for example, if you've eaten something which has a strong smell, then here it's recommended to use siwak. Likewise, عند الانتباه من النوم, when a person wakes up from sleeping, the mouth will have smell, so it's recommended to use siwak to remove that. Likewise, إذا طال سكوته, when a person has been silent for a long time, after that it's also recommended to use siwak, all for the same reason of keeping the mouth clean and fresh. As وتسن البداءة بالأيمن في كل شأنه. Recommended you start with the right hand side in all of the person's matters. So, times the siwak, you start with the right hand side of the mouth, move towards the left. Likewise in wudu, as we'll mention in a bit, it's recommended to start with the right hand side. Wash your right arm before your left arm, your right foot before your left foot. Likewise, for example, putting on clothes, it's recommended to start with your right hand side, put in your right sleeve first, then your left sleeve. And when you take it off, the opposite. You take off your left sleeve first, then right sleeve. Likewise, putting on shoes, put on the right shoe first, then the left shoe. As for taking off, the opposite. You take off the left shoe first, then the right shoe. And we also already mentioned in terms of entering the masjid, the house, recommended to enter with your right foot. The next masala here is وَيَجِبُ الْخِتَانُ وَعِيدَ بُلِغْ. The issue of al-khitan, circumcision. The madhab says that khitan is obligatory. It's obligatory for both males to be circumcised. And when is khitan obligatory? It is obligatory بعيد بلوغ. Yani just after the person reaches puberty, it is obligatory for them to get circumcised. As for before reaching puberty, it's not obligatory. We'll mention when is the best time. It says ما لم يخف على نفسه, except if the person fears harm for themselves, and in such case they are not obligated to be circumcised. There's reason to think that circumcision is going to medically harm this person, then it's not obligatory. But if they have no excuse, then it's obligatory. As I mentioned, the madhab says that circumcision is obligatory for both men and women. That's all the madhab of Shafi'i. Then the next masala, it says وَزَمَنَ الصِّغَرِ أَفْضَلِ, and it's better for a person to be circumcised when they're small, when they're a baby or a child. That is better. They say إلى التمييز, يعني before a person reaches 7 years old, it's better for them to be circumcised. But it's disliked from the time which a person is born until the 7th day. In الولادة إلى سبع أيامه, it is disliked for a person to be circumcised in that time. Rather, from the 8th day onwards, it is recommended to start them circumcised. And once they reach puberty, then it's obligatory. The next section now is speaking about the recommended acts of wudu. It says وَمِن سُنَنِ الْوُضُوء, from those things which are recommended to do in wudu, siwak, to use the siwak, already mentioned. Using siwak, it is recommended to do when a person is doing wudu and they're washing their mouth. عند المضمضة وغسل كفيه ثلاثا إلا قائم من نوم ليل فيجب. Also washing your hands 3 times before you start the wudu. So the wudu, in terms of its furud, the obligatory parts, the first obligatory body part which has to be washed in wudu is the face, we mentioned. But before washing the face, it's recommended to wash your hands 3 times. Those 3 times aren't the washing of the hand, which is a obligation. The obligation comes later, after washing the face, to wash your hands and your arms. But before washing your face, it's also recommended to wash your hands, meaning from the tips of the fingers until the wrist, 3 times. So it's recommended, except in one case where it is obligatory. إِلَّا لِقَائِمٍ مِّن نَوْمِ لَيْلٍ after the wudu. It's obligatory on a person wash their hands 3 times, according to the madhab, in the case when they just get up from sleeping. The person wakes up from sleep, then they have to wash their hands 3 times. But here, this is for a person who has slept in the night. As for sleeping in the day, taking a nap in the day, that's not obligation. Only for a person who is during the night. And it's also only for deep sleep, the sort of sleep which breaks your wudu. As for light sleep, if you just nod off a bit for a few minutes, then that doesn't obligate. That doesn't obligate washing your hands. But if it was deep sleep which breaks your wudu, and it was in the night when you wake up, here you have to wash your hands 3 times before starting wudu. If you intentionally leave off washing your hands 3 times, then your wudu is invalid. If you intentionally leave it off, but if you leave it off accidentally, then your wudu is valid. As we mentioned when you speak about wajibat al-wudu, things which are obligatory to do in wudu. It says, إِلَّا لِقَائِمٍ مِّن نَوْمِ لَيْلٍ فَيَجِبُ ثَلَاثًا بِنِيَّةٍ وَتَسْمِيَةٍ. This person who is قائم من نوم ليل, who has woken up from sleeping, it's obligatory for them to wash their hands 3 times before starting wudu. Washing it 3 times, obligatory, whilst having niyyah, intention, and at-tasmiyah, to say Bismillah. So here, when you wash your hands 3 times before starting wudu, here you have to have a specific niyyah, intention for it, not the intention of wudu itself, because this isn't part of the wudu thing which is done. The sunnah before wudu, or in this case, it's wajib, obligatory for a person who has been sleeping. And likewise, they have to say Bismillah. Then you wash your hands 3 times, then you can start the wudu. So that's the obligation. والبداءة قبل غسل وجه بمضمضة استنشاق بيمينه. Likewise, from the recommendations of wudu is to do al-madmada, washing the mouth, al-istinshaq, washing the nose, before washing the rest of the face. As we mentioned in a bit, washing the mouth and nose is part of washing the face. But in terms of order, it's best to wash your mouth and nose first, then wash the rest of the face. And washing the mouth and nose is done with your right hand, and thumb in three goes, so 3 times. You take water in your hand, then you put half that water in your mouth and half in your nose. You do that once, and then you do that second time, you do that time. That's the recommendation. واستنثار بيسار. It's also recommended to blow out the water from your nose. الاستنثار, blowing out the water from your nose with your left hand. So with your right hand, you put water in your mouth and your nose together. Then you blow out water from your nose with your left hand. So istinshaq, putting water in your nose. That is blowing water out of your nose. But tayamun, likewise, tayamun meaning to wash the right hand side before the left hand side. That's in terms of washing your right arm before your left arm, and washing your right foot before your left foot. This ordering between the right and left, that's a recommendation. It's not an obligation. So the person was to wash the left hand before the right hand, or the left foot before the right foot. There's no issue with that. The wudu is valid. But the ordering which is recommended is to wash the right hand side before the left hand side. It says, وَتَخْلِيلُ لِحْيَةٍ كَثِيفَةٍ. Likewise, from the recommendations in wudu, is for a person to do تخليل اللحية. You run their fingers through the beard. But that's only for a beard which is كثيفة, which is thick, meaning the skin can't be seen underneath it. If it's a lihya khafifa, if it's a thin beard, which the skin can be seen underneath it, then here it's obligatory for him to make sure the water reaches the skin. So takhleel, meaning only running your fingers through your beard, that is for a person who has a thick beard. So basically, in terms of the beard, you have 3 situations. The first situation, if the beard is thick and it's not just on the face, but it's hanging down from the face. Here it's obligatory for the person to run water on the front of the beard, because it's part of washing the face. As we mentioned, in terms of washing the face, the person has to wash the whole face, starting from the hairline all the way up to all the way up to the bottom of his beard. So the water has to wash the front of all of that. As for inside the beard, between the hairs, you don't wash what's between the hairs, but you run your fingers through it. As for hair which is thin, which is on the face, you can see the skin underneath, then here it's obligatory to make sure the water goes down under the hair, into and onto the skin. It says, وَتَخْلِيلُ لِحْيَةٍ كَثِيفَةٍ وَأَصَابِعٍ. Likewise to wipe between your fingers. You run your fingers between one another on your hands and also in between your toes. Is takhleel, which is recommended. So when a person is washing their hands in wudu, they run their fingers between one another. Likewise, they run their pinky finger. It's recommended to use your left hand's finger and wipe between your toes in wudu when washing the foot. So inshallah, we'll stop here. Next lesson, we'll take the furud, the obligations regarding wudu. If there's any questions, feel free to ask. Allah Alam.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, for the lecture. I'll ask some questions if there are any. So if anybody has any questions, put it in the member chat or in the voice channel chat, and I'll read them out. So let's see. So there's a question about how much amount of water is required to do wudu.
There's no specific amount which is needed to wudu. The recommended amount the Prophet ﷺ would do wudu with mud. Was it mud or muddain? But no, it was either one handful or 2 handfuls of water. So it's recommended to not use a lot of water, as long as it's an amount which is enough to do isbagh, meaning for the water to run on your body parts, flow off it. That's fine. And using too much water is disliked. It's makruh to do israf, using more water than necessary. So there's no specific amount which you have to use, as long as the body parts have been washed completely. Person's done isbagh, meaning that there's no dry parts left on their arms or face or feet, and that's enough.
So there is another question about what is the steps to do a simple wudu, and I think by that he means just the obligatory parts of the wudu.
Okay, so obviously, inshallah, that'll be more clear in the next lesson when we speak about the obligations in wudu, al-furud al-wajibat. That the bare minimum which a person has to do is they say Bismillah, they wash their face one time, the whole face, from the line up to the ears, down to the bit, as well as the mouth and nose. Then they wash the right hand, their hands, their arms, from the fingertips up to the elbow one time. Then they wipe the head, the whole head, including the ears, one time. And then they wash their feet up to the ankles and including ankles one time. That's the minimum which a person has to do. In terms of washing the mouth and nose, the minimum amount is just for you to wash any amount of the mouth or nose. It's not necessary to rinse the whole mouth. As long as water goes into the mouth, that's sufficient. Likewise, if water goes into the nose, that is sufficient. That's the smallest amount of wudu which you can do.
So the next question is, when is it said that a man can't use the water in the container if the previous user was a female, and is it for all females, including one's mahram?
So that was about Adlu Ma'imra, which was used by a female for ghusl or wudu. That water, it can't be used with the conditions which you mentioned. If it was water which she used with no one else there in khalwa, and if it was used for the wudu or ghusl, as I mentioned, likewise it has to be for woman who is, if it was used by a woman who is baligh, who is an adult reaching puberty. As for a child, then it doesn't matter. And there's no difference between whether that woman was a family member, mahram, or not. Likewise, there's not even a difference between whether the woman was Muslim or not. In all cases, if that water was used by a woman, then it's not allowed to use for a man.
And then there is a follow-up question that if that water is the only water that's available and you don't have any way to do tayammum, then is it permissible?
As far as I remember, Allah Alam, is that in such a case, the madhab says that the person has to use the water, then also do tayammum. If that's the only water which they find, they do wudu using that water, then on top of that, they do tayammum. Allah Alam.
Okay, so maybe I'm mistaken, but it's a new question. It just asks, if you have dirty water to use out of darura, can you do wudu with it instead of tayammum? So I was mistaken in the previous question. So the question is about dirty water in general.
Dirty water, if by dirty they mean najis, impure, then no. such a case, you do tayammum. If you can't do tayammum, which is the case of faqid al-tahurain, person who doesn't have neither water nor that to do with tayammum with, in such a case, person prays in the situations there are without tahara, they just pray the bare minimum in salah. We'll mention that when we come to the sections. But that's the case if they only have water which is najis, impure. They don't do wudu with it. If it's water which is dirty, if you mean by dirty like it's mixed with dirt, then that water is still tahur, it's still permissible to use. There's no problem. I mean dirty as an impure, no, you don't use it.
So the next question it asks, can you use dirt for doing wudu? And I think by that he means tayammum.
Well, obviously, if you can't use dirt for wudu, you can only use water for wudu. But as for tayammum, you do tayammum when there's no water. We'll speak about how to do that. Yeah, and tayammum, you have to use soil. You don't use anything else. So it's different to wudu because in tayammum, you're not wiping everything. You're only wiping your hands up to the wrists and your face.
The next question asks, can you do masa in simple wudu? And by that, I think they mean just the obligatory part of the wudu.
So I'm guessing they mean al-masah al-khuffayn, wiping over the socks. That can be done as long as the conditions of it are met. Conditions we'll speak about in the next section. Speak about al-masah al-khuffayn. Those conditions are, briefly speaking, the first is the person has to have had wudu when they put on the socks. Socks have to also be tahir, have to be pure, they be mubah, permissible to wear, to be yastur mahal al-fard, they have to cover the whole foot, and they have to not be see-through. There's some other smaller conditions, but those are the most important ones. The person has met all the conditions, then they can wipe over their socks for 1 day and 1 night, 24 hours if they're not traveling, 3 days and 3 nights if they are traveling.
So it looks like that's all the questions we have today. So Jazakallah khair again for the lecture.
Yeah, cool.
And I think we'll conclude it for today here.
So our next lesson is next week.
Yep. The next lesson is going to be next week at the same time, and we'll go forward with the book. So that's all for now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.